Seches Nazir Daf Mem Beis discusses the halachas of the forbidden haircut of a Nazir, as well as the Tumah Isser of a Nazir. So we will have three relatively short Mishnayos, and we'll be discussing the minimum size of the haircut. The Gemara will have a few questions which will remain unanswered. The Gemara will talk a little bit about Eine Miskaven as it applies to haircuts, and then we'll talk about Tumah. If a Tameh person touches something Tameh again, is that a violation of the Isser of a Nazir to become Tameh? Same thing would apply to the Isser for Kohanim to become Tameh to Mesims. Let's begin the Gemara. The Gemara refers to our last Mishnah, where we saw that there is an Isser for a Nazir to take a haircut, as well as an obligation for him to take a haircut at the end of his Nazirus. So the Gemara over here quotes a halacha: anyone who did the haircut at the end of Nazirus without a razor does not count as anything, or if he did the full haircut but left on 2 hairs, doesn't count as anything either. It has to be a complete haircut. Now 1 hair, that's meaningless, and that will come up again later, but 2 hairs means the haircut was incomplete. Says Racha Breit Ravika, you see from here that there is a halacha called Ruboy Kikulai, that if you just do the majority of something, it's like you did the whole thing. That is a halacha da'iraisa. It's not a d'rabbanan halacha, it's a da'iraisa halacha. How do you know? Because the Torah here has to teach me specifically that here you have to do the whole thing, because it says v'yam ashri yigachenu is a repetition to teach me that it has to be fully cut, every single hair, except of course unless he misses one. But there is a specific needer to teach me that there is no ruba kikula here. That means that generally ruba kikula is something that would apply even on a deraisa level. So the Gemara says that Rav Yosi asked Rabbi Chanina, how could you learn that from here? How could you learn from Bayem Ashvi Yigachenu to the haircut of a Nazir? Bayem Ashvi Yigachenu was talking about the haircut of a Nazir who became Tameh. We're talking here about the haircut of a Nazir who never became Tameh and is just finishing off his Nazirus properly. So that was his kasha. The Gemara says they laughed at him and said that's not a kasha. We obviously learned the halachas of the haircut of a Nazir Tameh and a Nazir Tahar interchangeably, because the entire source that the haircut of a Nazir Tameh has to be done with a razor is learned from a Nazir Tahar. So the halacha that it has to be full haircut certainly could be learned the other way, from a Nazir Tameh to a Nazir Tahar. Now the Gemara has a couple of shaylos. Abai says, what if he shaved everything except for 2 hairs, and then the rest of the hairs grew back, and then he shaved off those 2? So he did shave all the hair, just not at the same time. Is that a problem or not? So the Gemara doesn't answer that. The Gemara brings another question. This was asked by Rava, and here we'll have to go through 2 versions till we nail down the question. So Rava first says, what if he shaved everything except for 2 hairs? Then he shaved one of those 2, but the other one fell out. So the Gemara understands that 1 hair is meaningless, so shaving off 1 hair doesn't do anything. So in this case, when he did his initial haircut, he left 2 hairs, that's not a complete haircut. Then he shaved 1 hair, that's meaningless. But then the other hair fell out, and that's also meaningless. It's not there anymore. So the question is that he left 2 hairs, but then he never did a full, complete shaving of the rest of that. Everything he did afterwards was meaningless. So the Gemara says this can't be the right version of the question, because if he did a full haircut and left 2, and then he cut another one, that is included in his first haircut. If somebody were to cut all the hairs off 1 hair at a time, you wouldn't say, well, each hair was meaningless, so he didn't do the mitzvah of the haircut because he only did 1 at a time, and 1 hair counts as nothing. No, we wouldn't say that. So the question has to be where the 1 hair is separated somehow from the other ones, and therefore it has to be as follows. He cut off all the hair except for 2, then one of those 2 fell out. Now all he has left is the last hair, and he cuts it off, but cutting 1 hair doesn't count as anything. So he never did the mitzvah of hair cutting. His first hair cutting left 2 behind, so that wasn't the mitzvah. His last hair cutting was only 1 hair, so that wasn't the mitzvah. So he never did it. So the Gemara says, interestingly, the Gemara phrases it as, there's no hair, but there's no hair cut. So the Gemara says, what does that mean? The Gemara says, no, what it means to say, even though there's no hair left, the mitzvah of hair cutting was never performed, and therefore it hasn't been finished. So that is the one sad that it shouldn't work, and the Gemara leaves the question unanswered. All right, now we get to our next mission, which is just 1 line. And it talks about if a Nazir is allowed to do things which could cause hair to fall out. Now, pulling out a hair would be usher. Can he scrub his head and similar things? So the Mishnah says a Nazir is allowed to wash his head with shampoo. He's allowed to rub it, even if it pulls out hair. He's allowed to separate strands of his hair, even if it will pull out hair, but he cannot comb it with a comb. So Mark comments briefly that the fact that he's allowed to shampoo it and separate it. That sounds like it's Reb Shimon, who holds you don't have to worry about accidentally doing things. Davar she'eino miskaven, like we see in Hilchos Shabbos, the same thing here. If he pulls out here, it's eino miskaven, so it's not a problem. But then, why should he not be allowed to comb it? That would also be eino miskaven. So that sounds like it's a Rabbanan. So who is this Mishnah? So the Gemara answers, Rabba says, it's all Reb Shimon. But when you comb the hair, you intend to pull out some of the hairs. You intend to pull out the loose hair. Mepharshim explained, it's not that you intend to do it, but that it's a psik ratio. You're for sure going to pull them out. The other ones, you're not for sure going to pull out, and there Reb Shimon holds it's not a problem. But combing is for sure going to pull out hairs, and that is a problem. Okay, our next Mishnah goes to Rabbi Shmuel. Again, a short Mishnah. It says he cannot rub his hair with earth because it pulls out hair. So Gemara asks, what exactly is the way this was phrased? Is it because it pulls out hair, or is it because sometimes it pulls out hair? Now, the difference between those two is as follows. If it's because it pulls out hair, so then the only reason it's a problem is because this exact action will pull out hair. Were you to have a specific type of earth, let's say, you know is not going to pull out hair, so it wouldn't be a problem. Because the only problem is that it's going to pull out hair, and this won't. If, however, the problem is that some types of earth pull out hair, then what we mean to say is that we don't allow you to use any type of earth, gzeira atu, those types of earth which do pull out hair. Even if you had something specific which you knew would not pull out any hair, you couldn't use it, because then people will end up pulling out other hairs, using other earth which will pull out hair. So the Gemara asks, so which is it? And if you therefore have a specific type of earth which you know for sure won't pull out hair, could you use that? And the Gemara doesn't answer, the Gemara leaves it as a teiku. Alright, now we get to our next Mishnah, which discusses how many times you can be over the same Isser. The Mishnah talks about all three cases: drinking wine, taking a haircut, and being a tameh. And the basic rule is, in order to violate it a second time, you need a shear, a minimum shear of the violation, and you also need a separate warning. So, if a Nazir is drinking wine all day long, if he's only warned once, it's no additional Isser. If he's warned additional times, then for each additional revius that he drinks, he violates an additional Isser, and he can get malchus again. If he's cutting hair, so if he only gets warned once, there's no additional Isser. However, if he's warned multiple times, for each additional 2 hairs that he cuts, it's another Isser, he can get malchus again. And Tumah is the same thing. If he becomes Tameh multiple times throughout the day, but he's only warned once, it's only 1 Isser. But if he's warned multiple times, each time he becomes Tameh, he's Chayiv again, and it's an additional Isser. So now the Gemara is going to analyze this concept that becoming Tameh again while you're Tameh is an additional Isser. The Gemara is going to get into that. So the Gemara quotes Rabbah, says the name of Rav Huna. We're going to have a machlokes here what Rav Huna said exactly. Rabbah's version is that the Torah says lo yitama, and then it says lo yavo. So the exact phrase is and then in a previous pasuk it says kol yimei hazir l'Hashem al nefesh meis lo yavoi. So it says lo yitama and lo yavoi. Lo yitama means you shouldn't touch a dead corpse. Lo yavoi means you shouldn't walk into the room with a dead corpse. Sounds like it's 2 separate isurim. So the way Rabbah quotes Rav Huna is this is to tell me that there are 2 isurim. One isur to become tameh by touching a body for a nazir, and another isur to go into the room with the body to have tamas ohel. Those 2 things are separate isurim. So even though when he did one, he's tameh already, if he does the other one, he violates a separate isur and he can get a separate malchus. However, if you were to do tumah twice, that is, he touches a corpse, lets go, and touches it again, that's not 2 separate isurim. Now, Rav Yosef says chas v'shalom. He says holakim, a lashon of shua. He says that's not what Rav Huna said. Rav Huna said even if he were to do tumah and tumah again, he would violate the Isser a second time. And he quotes a Maimar of Rav Huna that says that. Rav Huna says that if a Nazir is standing in a cemetery and they pass him a mace, either a relative of his or someone else, and he touches it, he's chayiv a second time for becoming tameh. He was tameh already. He can't become tameh on top of being tameh. So clearly you see here that Rav Huna holds it's a separate chayiv. Even the tumah of being in a cemetery, which is the same as the tumah of touching a corpse, it's 2 separate violations, even though it's the same thing, even though his tumah doesn't get any worse. Now Abaya asks, how could that be? I have a brisa that says that if a kohen has a dead relative on his shoulders, that is, he's carrying him, and then they hold out another mace, either a relative or someone else, and he touches it, he's chayiv. You may think he's chayiv a second time. Therefore, the Torah says, "Well, yichalel." Kohen should not become tummy, because that would be a chilul, it would be a profaning of his kedusha. So it refers only to someone who is not mechulel. But if someone's already mechulel, then velo yichal, don't be mechal, doesn't apply. So therefore, the isser is only to become tummy. If someone's tummy already, there's no isser to have additional contact with a corpse. So Gemara asks, that's a brisa, very nice brisa. Abai is asking, I don't know if Huna, but it's a steer to our Mishnah. Our Mishnah said clearly by a Nazir, and a Nazir and Kohen should be the same. It said that if a Nazir gets separate warnings and he touches Tumah separate times in the same day, he can get Malchus again. It's violating separate Isur. So you see clearly it is separate Isur. So there's a contradiction here between the Mishnah and the brisa. So Gemara says it's not a contradiction. The Mishnah that says he gets Malchus again and again is talking about where he let go of the mace between. That is, he touches a mace, lets go, touches it again. Why? Because his status of tumah changes when he lets go, and it gets worse when he touches again. How so? The halacha is that somebody who's touching a mace, while he's touching the mace, transmits tumas shiva, tumas mace, to someone who touches him. So let's say Shimon is touching a mace, and then Reuven touches Shimon. So Reuven gets tumah for 7 days as well, just by touching Shimon, not by touching the mace. Now, if Shimon were to let go of the mace, and now Reuven touches him, Reuven only gets tumah for that day. He goes to the mikveh, he's Torah that night. So as soon as Shimon lets go, his level of tumah drops, because he can no longer transmit 7-day tumah, he can only transmit 1-day tumah. As soon as he touches the mace again, now his level of tumah just climbed. That's an increase in his level of tumah, which is another violation. That's what our Mishnah is talking about. The Mishnah, the brisa that Abaye quoted, that's talking about where he's holding onto one mace and he touches another mace. It doesn't change his halacha. Either way, if somebody were to touch him, he would become tumas shiva, whether he's touching the second mace or not. So that didn't change anything. And this is what's called a tumah b'chiburin, and therefore there is no additional tumah and there's no additional isser, and our Mishnah would agree to that. So Gemara asks, that means to tell me that the concept of tumah b'chiburin is a deraisa. That when Reuven touches Shimon, who's touching a mace, Reuven becomes tumas shiva. That's a halacha deraisa. It has to be halacha deraisa, because you're telling me that by Shimon touching the mace the second time, his level of tumah goes up and he gets malchus again. That means if he's getting malchus, it means it's a violation of a deraisa. That means his level of tumah must have gone up mid-deraisa. So you're telling me that halacha, that his tumah, that he transmits tumas shiva to Reuven, is a din in deraisa, but it can't be true, because we have a quote of Rav Yitzchak Bar Yosef and Rav Yanai, who said that this halacha of tumah b'chiburin only applies for certain things. When Reuven touches Shimon, he only becomes tumas shiva, so that he can't eat truma for 7 days and he can't eat kachim for 7 days. But if he's a nazir, he doesn't have to do it. Does not cancel his nazirus, and he doesn't have to start over. And a carbon pesach, he's allowed to eat within 7 days. He goes to the mikveh that day, and he can eat a carbon pesach as soon as the sun goes down. Now, how could you split that halacha? Why should it not apply to nazirus and to pesach? Obviously, that shows that this is a din derabanan, and the rabbanan applied the halacha selectively. But deraisa, you wouldn't be able to say that. So Gemara answers, no. This is talking about something else. It's not talking about where Reuven touches Shimon. This is talking about where Reuven touches Shimon and Levi touches Reuven. Levi touching Reuven has this difference. Levi touching Reuven is someone touching someone who's touching a mace, someone touching someone who's touching someone else who's touching a mace. That is only derabanan, but otherwise it is deraisa. All right, now the Gemara refers back to our Mishnah and the statement of Rabbah on it, and we said that if somebody is tamei for touching a mace and then he walks into an ohel, he now gets another issur. So the Gemara asks again, how does that make sense? Why should it be like that? He was tamei already. What's this adding on? So the Gemara answers, so that's not the case. It's not that he was tummy already and then he became tumas ohel, or he was tumas ohel and then he became tumas mace. It's talking about where he became tumas ohel and tumas mace at the same time. So if he became only one and then a second one, you're right, it wouldn't make a difference. And he became tummy mace to 2 maceim at the same time, it would not make a difference. We'd only get one. However, if he got tumas mace and tumas ohel, that is tumas negia b'mace and tumas ohel at the same instant, then he would violate 2 isurim and get malchus for that. How's that? Gemara says very simple. He steps into a house that has a mace in it. He gets tumas and he's touching the mace, or his hand gets tumas mace, so he becomes tumah for touching the mace, and he gets another tumah for walking into the building. If, however, he just finds a mace out on the field and he touches it, that's one tumas mace. If he'll then go and touch another one, it won't make a difference.